Like, what is that to make you feel happy?
Yeah, well, right off the bat, I don't optimize for subjective well-being. I do that more for the audience. That's never been a goal of mine. I think when I was 19 or 20, I said, fuck happiness, and I've pretty much stuck with that. There's two concepts I'll bring up on this. So one is, people who want to be happy treat it like, I want to eat so good, I'm never hungry again. Or I want to sleep so well, I never need to sleep again. But I think happiness is much more like that than it is this achievement thing that you like check a box off. It doesn't really work that way. Secondly, I think that all the people that I know who obsess about happiness are the least happy people. Outwardly, sure, but they're the ones who are like committing suicide. I worry about that because it's a goal that by having it as a goal, it automatically sits outside of you, which means there's space between you and the goal, which means you're not actually happy. My goal is to be happy, which means you aren't right now. So I have made meaning, which is ironic because I don't find things inherently meaningful, but I have found meaningful work as I deem meaningful to be the thing that I derive the most joy from. And so I have it broken down to a more tactical level, which is what days have I enjoyed and looked back on and been proud of myself for that day. And over probably a 3 or 4 year period, I just looked at the good days and the bad days. And I looked at what the good days had in common and looked at what the bad days had in common. I've just over time minimized the things that happen on the bad days and maximized the things that happen on the good days. Even to big investments. Like, I am much happier when I work out. Like, rather, not even much happier when I work out. When I look back on my day, this was a good day, almost always has a workout in it. And usually with people I like. And so workouts take probably longer for me than most people. Because I'm not I'm in and out in 45 minutes and I did my morning routine and I can send out 40 emails from whatever. Everyone's different. But for me, I work out for like 2 hours. It's because I like to. And so I do it. And I do it with people that I like. And so I'm willing to invest the time because, like, what's the point anyways? Like, why make all the money? To what? Enjoy it. Like, I enjoy doing that, so I do that every day. I like writing. So I write for, 4 to 6 hours a day. And those are probably the 2 biggest activities that I do. And if I can write with somebody that I like, then I do something I like with people I like. And I think that that's probably been the single simplest formula, is doing things you like with people you like, and trying to maximize as much time as I can on that bucket. And then everything else I try and minimize as overhead or outsource. Most people are like, why am I not happy? They also see a problem with them not happy. They have it as an expectation of the world and the universe that they should be happy, right? And to the same degree, people have an expectation that life should be meaningful. Like, why does life need to be meaningful? Why does the universe need to make you happy? It doesn't. You can choose that, but it's just like not a requirement. And so they think there's something wrong with it, when in reality, like, you're alive and you might procreate, you might not, but like, that's the only reason that you're here. Oh man, there we go. Broke my wedding ring. It's a sign. I don't know, silicone. It's like my 3rd one. I break them every like 2 years.
As a side note, this is fucking incredible.
Oh, cool.
Really good shit.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Whatever you took, take that shit again on Thursday.
It smells like commitment. So like, if I boil it down, like, happiness is fleeting because you get hungry again, you get sleepy again. Meaning you can only really tell at the end. Like, did I do something that contributed? But on the day-to-day perspective, I can know that what I'm doing is useful. And if what you're doing is not useful, then I think that's harder. And I also think that men and women are different here. So we use like happy, I hate the term in general, but like, I think men and women want different things out of life. And I think we bucket them together. It's also the same degree like why therapy with men doesn't work necessarily the same. We have to have a different approach. Like, people think men need more love, and I just don't think that's true. I think we want more respect. And like, you get respect from being useful. And so I make that the goal. Like, no one casts aside a man who is useful. And being useful is an attractive trait. Like if you see someone who's really good at something, it's hard, like for like women, it's like that is it's a contributing member of society. They do stuff like that help other people. We want them here. Like you get status from that. And so that means that skill mastery in a very real way can help you attract the mate you want, which is why I indexed a ton of my life around getting better at stuff. So like, and also from a stress perspective, people are like, I remember I see sometimes these podcasts from successful entrepreneurs and they're like, man, I'm still worried I could lose it all tomorrow. I don't have that. Like I'm genuinely not afraid of losing it all tomorrow because I have lost it before and I got it back. And I think it's like, if you have if you were lucky, because there are guys who get lucky. And if you are lucky, then absolutely you should be worried about it, because if you do lose it, you don't know how to get it back. But if you have skills, then like, I know that I can go to any business and help grow it. And that's valuable, that's useful. And so even reframing the word value as usefulness is probably also an easier way to do it for people to kind of like comprehend. But I think if you make that the goal, it also takes it away from you. So the reason I hate, I would say I have a friend-ish, I have a friend who's single and struggles because he's not happy. Successful, but not happy. And so he obsesses on happiness. And I was like, do you know that when you obsess on happiness, all you do is think about you all day? Like, it's all you're doing. You're just thinking about you all fucking day. And like, how useless. And so the nice thing with being useful is that in order to be useful, you have to be useful to other people. Like no one can be useful on their own. You have to be useful to other people. So there's a service element, but there's also a self-improvement element, which is to be useful to other people, you need to improve yourself. And so that's why I think being useful has been probably my day-to-day goal of what I need to do. And that's served me well. Not saying anyone should they can do whatever they want, but for me, that's helped me.
It for sure offers clarity. They've done brain scans for people with depression, and the areas of the brain that are responsible for like self-reflection and rumination are like overly active. Yeah,
they think about themselves too much. I mean, this is a Tony Robbins quote. He said, if you stay in your head, you're dead. And because it rhymes, it's true. And so, but for real though, like when I was 19, the reason I said fuck happiness is like, I realized that I was in this cycle, this loop of trying to, like everything you analyze of like, does this make me happy? Does this pizza make me happy? Does this class make me happy? I mean, I quit pre-med because I thought biology didn't make me happy. Now I'm very glad that I did because I like business a lot more now, but like that was the reason I did it. I studied really hard, I did well, but I was like, this doesn't make me happy. Like, of course it fucking doesn't make you happy. You suck at it, you're learning something. You're gonna suck for a very long time. It's only when all these skills go together that you'll be good at something and you'll actually be useful to society. Of course, you learning the fucking chromosomes doesn't do anything, but it's because of what it shows a school that you're willing to put up with so that you might be useful to society in the particular skill set. And so yeah, I think being useful is a far better goal. And this is me just shouting out specifically to men. If you could just try this on for a month. If you're happy, do whatever the fuck you. Well, really, just do whatever you want either way. But if what you're working isn't working for you, or what you're doing isn't working for you, I would try this on for size. 1, say that you're going to stop trying to be happy. Just give up on it. Just stop thinking about it. Like I'm not. You know what? I'm actually okay with being unhappy. I'm fine with it. I'm still here. Like it doesn't mean anything. Okay. And so then you can take action despite your lack of happiness and think, okay, how can I be useful to other people? And I think if you do that, you'll actually start focusing on the tasks and on people outside of yourself, and you'll be amazed at how much better you feel overall. And what happened to me when I went into my fuck happiness thing is that I stopped thinking about happiness altogether. And then like years later, I was like, you know what? Because I was so used to, because like I wanted to label myself that way and be okay with it. People would ask me like, hey, XYZ, I'd be like, oh, I'm not a happy person. I would just like say that up front. That way I didn't have to. And I remember catching myself probably like 5 years later. And I was like, I say that. I was like, but I actually really do like my life a lot. So I stopped saying I'm not a happy person because like I actually kind of do like my life. But I feel like I only got to liking my life by being willing to not like what I was doing for a long period of time. I think most people feel really lonely when you want something that doesn't currently exist. And so some people call that dreams, some people call that goals, whatever it is. You're trying to pull something from your mind into reality, and you want it done a certain way. And if it's not done that way, it's not what you imagined. And so people on the outside will throw stones and call you names that they think will change your behavior and get you to stop. And the more I have been the person trying to pull things into reality, the more I've tried to weather and build kind of defenses against those things, so that when those stones get hurled at you by being called a control freak, or by saying you micromanage things, or that you have incredibly high standards, the answer is yes, because I want it done right the first time. Because either way, if you have enough will, it's going to get done the way that I want it to get done regardless. And it'll be less painful if we just do it right the first time, because we will still have to do it. And you may have to do it 3 or 4 more times, but eventually you will just succumb to the fact that we're going to do it this way. And I think all of the great things that have happened for humanity have been from one man or woman who had an idea and just wouldn't let people shake it from them.
The standard of right isn't actually that insane when you think about it. It's just right. It's just done without error. And I guess that the margin that some people consider to be right and other people consider to be right just changes.
I'm trying to think of a really good example for this, but like the level of detail, I mean, it's the difference between a book that gets 10 or 100 5-star reviews and a book that gets 100,000 5-star reviews. And everyone wants a silver bullet, but most of the things that make great products is 100 golden BBs. And so that's one of the things we have is there's no silver bullets, only hundreds of golden BBs. There's just hundreds of tiny little improvements. It's like, how can we look at the can? How can we improve the way it ships? What about the weight? What about the color scheme? How does it sit on the shelves? How are people going to look at it in this market versus this market? Or like, how does this name appear on hats and on shirts and on sites? And what's the RGB, whatever the color scope is here versus there? And it's just 1,000 details that someone who does not care will not put the work to look into, because they're trying to check a box rather than to make something that people will love. Or I heard this from, I can't remember who it was from, but basically that the best art is art where the artist makes it for themselves. And where you see commercial work is where a bunch of people are trying to make something for an audience. And so they're trying to like rinse and recycle stuff that actually solves no one's problems, because no one is actually the audience. Whereas when you make it for yourself, there's thousands of people just like you who will have the same depth of understanding of it, but it feels selfish in the moment to make something for yourself. But when you make it for yourself, you actually make it for everyone.
But you can be reliably informed that there's some non-insignificant minority of people who also think like you.
Yes.
Who also have the same problems as you, who also have the same fears as you.
Yeah.
So I'm going through 2 projects at the moment, one being a book and the other being Eutonic, that is nascent and it's new.
Yeah.
And that means that there's lots more of these small things that are actually quite big things.
Yeah.
But I was telling you before we started about the fact there's a hyphen, and there's a hyphen missing between one piece of copy and another piece of copy, but it's printed on 1 million cans.
You're right.
And I think, for fuck's sake. But being concerned about being seen as someone who has too high standards is something that for quite a while I felt ashamed about.
Yeah.
Because you feel like a bother. You feel like you're being unnecessarily, it's not even detail oriented, it's picky.
Cumbersome, yeah.
Yes, laborious. Mm-hmm. And I realized, probably last year, it took me until last year to realize that not succumbing to stopping doing that is probably one of the only reasons why I've had any success.
I mean, I think for anyone who's listening, if you have that, I would consider it a gift. It makes sense for the majority of people to be opposed to that, because you do make more work for everyone else. But the product of that work is so much better. And so if you want the work that you have to last and to be meaningful and make an impact, it comes from 100 golden BBs of 100 particularities, of 100 peculiarities that you are picky about, because the whole thing needs to work. And what happens is if you have a big project, lots of people have to get involved, but there still needs to be one vision. And otherwise it looks like a Frankenstein where everyone just checks a box of something they did in the past. They just copy and paste it over. And then it doesn't resonate with anyone, because again, they just did it for everyone rather than for the artist. And so using that as a frame has given me permission to be me in an unreasonable world. And so like I told this last time I was on, but when I did the book launch, I practiced that presentation 3 times a day, every day for 30 days. So I did 100 run-throughs, full length run-throughs. First where I did it out loud and recorded it. Second time where I would watch the recording and then edit in real time and then do it again. And I did that every single day. And so then when I came live and had 500,000 people or whatever, it came out, I think, flawlessly. But people were like, man, you're such a natural at this. It's like, well, I did it 100 times. And so sometimes people even hear 100 and it's just a big number. But when you do 100 repetitions of something, the first 5 times you're like, wow, I'm so much better. But then like the difference between 5 and the next 95 times is what goes from being great to being a masterpiece. And like, it's that next 95 that I think is what makes people world class. And that's where everyone falls off. And that's why most people aren't.
There is this pull, I think, from people who don't have high standards to people who do have high standards to drag them back. It's this like moving back toward the mean is killing the only competitive advantage that you had.
Couldn't agree more. It's conforming, right? It's like people want you to do what they find comfortable, and most things that are like most companies deteriorate when the founder leaves and it happens slowly because you go from 100 golden BBs to 99 golden BBs and it doesn't look that different, and then there's 98 golden BBs and they're like, I don't know, and then 2 years later, 3 years later, you're like, I don't know, it doesn't have the same like magic as what it was, and that's because the art behind it isn't there because it's not unified anymore. It's not congruent anymore. It's 100 departments making decisions with people copying, pasting things for an audience that doesn't exist, rather than one person who's trying to be satisfied for an ideal that they are trying with all their might to live up to.
I suppose this is one of the important reasons to have a singular figure that is the hub and all of the spokes come off it, because they're the only person that gets to see absolutely everything. And typically that would be the founder. In a podcast, that would be a host. In a solo music band, that would be the lead singer or the songwriter or whatever. They get to see everything. For instance, we've done some episodes before where it's been the night before and I've been not happy with the color grade because the way that something displays on mobile is slightly different to the way that it displays in Premiere Pro, and it's slightly different to the way that it displays in a 6K videographer's curved screen. And I've gone, guys, it's like it's not up to scratch. Well, we're not going to be able to get it in time for the export. We're not going to be able to get it in time to get it uploaded, and then there's checks that go through on YouTube. I'm like, well, it needs to happen. Like, it just find a way to make this happen. And yeah, that impulse of just actually seeing it as something that you should lean into. Okay, well, it's not. And if you set the standard, and if everybody else gets up to that standard, what it shows is the people who continually push up against that and don't meet that standard, they're just not built for this particular company. They're built for someone else that makes a mediocre product, but they're not built for you, who's making a world-class product.
And I really want to jam down someone's throat right now. The whole like, don't be a perfectionist. Like like it's just another word for procrastination. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's complete bullshit. I think that's my quote. Is it?
Perfectionism is procrastination masquerading as quality control.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So then I'm gonna put a footnote on it that I think will add context, which is that most people who claim to be perfectionists are not perfectionists. They're actually procrastinating because they're not doing anything.
Correct.
And so it just is a socially acceptable label, because the real perfectionists feel this sickness where they like want to itch their skin off until the thing's done, but they are trying to get it done. Whereas the perfectionist or the procrastinator uses that to say, like, I'm not sure, I'm just getting it right. But like the person who's an actual perfectionist, one wants to finish and is working every hour of every day on the thing and seeing progress towards it. Because if you don't know how your thing is getting better, you're not a perfectionist, you're just ignorant.
Really, in the last couple of years, you've exploded. Without being on a big Netflix show, without having a celebrity movie come out, without being a celebrity, you've exploded with celebrity status. Is it a mindset? Is it confidence? Is it behaviors? What is it that has allowed you to get there?
I would definitely say it comes down to skills.
And if we're just defining skills as things that you do when introduced to some sort of external stimulus that gets some outcome. And I think simplifying a lot of the woo-woo around mindset, performance, confident, like all of that stuff, if you can boil it down to at the end of the day, even identity, right? All it is a list of behaviors that we do. And so I used to think earlier on when I would even explain to entrepreneurs, like when I was looking at entrepreneurs, we had a matrix for how we would kind of like score them. So you've got beliefs that will limit entrepreneurs, you've got traits that will limit entrepreneurs, and then you have skills. And that was my framework for a very long time. And then I had a very long discussion with Dr. Cashy, my closest friend, and he was like, I really want to challenge you on this. I was like, okay. He said, can you teach someone a trait? I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, let's say someone's loyal, right? Okay, you want to teach loyalty. That's a trait. Loyalty is an amorphous word, but has like a lot of laundry list of mini skills underneath of it, which is, okay, when you go out with your friends and a girl comes up to the group of friends, and let's say you're married, whatever, in that instance, and she says, can I buy you a drink? You say, no. Do you think I can train someone to do that? And I was like, yeah, I think you could train someone to do that. It's like, okay. Now, take every other line item underneath of loyalty that would be examples of loyalty. Those are behaviors that can be trained, which means that loyalty is a skill. And I was like, huh. And he was like, now let's push on beliefs, right? Well, beliefs, it's like, okay, a belief means you see a certain way the world is, and then you behave a certain way as a result, which is still stimulus response, which means that you can train someone to respond based on a stimulus. And so that really simplifies a lot of performance, success, etc., to simply like, what do I need to do when this condition is presented? And then you get out of the like, how are my emotions feeling? And I need to think positively and all of these things, into simply like, you can be as negative as you want. You can be as fearful as you want. You can be as angry as you want. You can be as ashamed as you want. If you still post this amazing piece of content in any of those emotional states, it will still perform the same. And so it's just that like the doing has to get done.
Right.
No matter what. And that's the only thing that moves the ball forward. And I think a lot of it is cutting out a lot of the fluff and the noise that is very loud in the marketplace of the 100 things you all have to do in order to be successful. When I know, just like you do, a ton of incredibly successful entrepreneurs, and their habits are actually incredibly varied. Some are night owls, some are morning people, some work all the time, some only like to work a couple hours a week, some are huge in real estate, like some are super healthy and health obsessed, and others, are Warren Buffett drinking Coke and eating McDonald's. So whenever there's these rules that people like to put on, and everyone wants to have these rules because they want to think, okay, if I do what Warren Buffett does, then I'll get what Warren gets. But what they do is I think they emulate the wrong part of Warren Buffett. And so
what should they be emulating?
You have to look back in time. And I think that's one of the things, people model the plateau, not the rise. And so it's like, we have a bunch of buddies, mutual, that have exited companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. And then they get like really obsessed with their health. And they have these massive morning routines, and they just get upset, all these supplements and red lights on us and ice luges and whatever, right?
Right.
And so what ends up happening is everyone who's watching says, oh, this person's successful. This is what they do. I should do that. But what got them there is not what they're doing now.
Right.
Right. So it's like you want to model the rise. And so a lot of times the rise is a lot of imbalance.
It's not always healthy on the rise.
No. I would even getting out of like defining health, right? But like I would say that there are absolutely trade-offs, and it's just whether or not you're willing to pay the price for it. And I think then we can take off the label of like, this is good, this is bad, this is healthy, this is unhealthy, and just simply say like, if the Nikes that you want on the wall are $500, that is the price. You can just choose to pay it or not. But if you choose to pay the $500 for the Nikes, you don't then say this was unhealthy or this was bad, or you label it. You just make the trade. And I think that's where a lot of people spend all this time analyzing themselves, like feeling about their feelings, thinking about their thoughts, rather than just executing. Like one of the best morning routines I can recommend to any person on earth is that you wake up and you decrease the time between when you wake up and when you start working. Like I need 90 minutes before I can really, it's like,
if you're looking for those types of financial results.
Totally. Yeah.
If you want more of a balanced life, and you love your morning routine to be chill and relaxed,
then
then know you're going to get the results that what you put in there.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to get extremely wealthy or amass a large sums of wealth by having a lazy mindset?
I really like this question. I don't know if it's where you were wanting me to go, but I do like the question a lot. Yes, for probably a different reason that people might expect. So I actually think in some ways, the lazier you are, if you can get over the initial hump, the more successful you can be. Because what happens is if you give a hardworking person a problem, they give you a hardworking solution. If you give a lazy person a problem, they'll give you a lazy man solution.
What's the easiest way to do this?
Right. And a lot of times, some of the best problems in the world get solved by deciding they're not problems.
What do you mean?
It's like, let's say Layla says, babe, and I don't like being called babe, right? Now, I could have a huge discussion about this, and this is our plan, so we can, get you out of saying this because it makes me feel this way. It reminds me of my mom, whatever, right?
Or you just let it go.
Or I decide that it's not a problem, and it's way faster to solve problems that way by deciding they're not problems to begin with.
Interesting.
And so from the lazy man's perspective, I'm a big believer in working smarter, not harder, with the massive caveat that you have to work incredibly hard to get smart.
So what do you mean by that? You have to have a massive amount of skills. You have to overcome your limiting beliefs. You've got to get more knowledge, take more classes, develop yourself, build more confidence, let go of these different challenges in order to get to that level.
Yeah, we all have to pay down the most expensive debt that we all pay every day, which is the debt of not knowing. Ignorance debt. And I love this close that I saw at a presentation years ago, and it's just so good. So man's looking out the audience, and he's got this whiteboard, and he writes $1 million across the top. And then he says, ma'am, how much do you make? And she says $50,000. So he writes $50,000 underneath the million, and then he subtracts it, and it says $950,000. He looks at her and he says, every single year, he said, you pay life $950,000 for not knowing how to make $1 million. And so the question is how much is that skill worth? The difference. That's what it's worth.
Right. Whatever that difference is.
Right.
And so, however long it takes.
And so it's one of the haunting thoughts that I have of man, why am I not making $1 billion a year? It's because right now I'm paying $800 million a year in ignorance tax for not knowing how to make $1 billion. Right. Or to be fair.
Or relationship tax or ignorance tax or whatever.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Timing tax. It could be a timing thing.
It's also what time frame are you thinking about?
Totally.
Most of the things that feel good for you are, feel good or bad for you in the long run, but also things that feel bad or feel good in the long run?
I actually, I only disagree because it's so vague. Because I think people just only think of the things that quote feel good, but there's tons of things that feel good that are not bad for you. Sex feels good, it's not bad for you. It's just, we immediately jump to cigarettes, booze, whatever. But it's really anything in excess is bad for you. You have so much sex that you don't go to work, you don't eat, it's bad for you. You know what I mean? If you, even cigarettes, if you have one cigarette a week, it doesn't do anything for you. Probably you smoke more than that just walking outside. You know what I mean? For a week in terms of just CO2 from cars. So it's always it's always in the dose.
Yeah, is maybe the usefulness of that.
People want a binary when it's really a continuum.
What do you mean by that?
People say, oh, I like it, therefore they want a simple rule, but life has way more continuums than binaries. Good and bad. First off, define good, define bad. Second off, like it or not, how much, to what degree, how often, what is good, whatever. I mean, a really fun one is that I think, so Dr. Kashey and I have talked about this, but there's this whole thing on drinking a glass of wine every day. Resveratrol is one of the key ingredients. It's anti-cancer fighting, whatever. But if you look at centenarians, people who live over 100, a disproportionate amount of them smoke. And so I find that interesting because I think that genetically it means that person probably has some sort of protection against lung-based carcinogens, which then means they get all the benefits of cigarettes and none of the downsides. And so they're able to basically benefit from all the stress-reducing components of nicotine and smoking, but then just don't get cancer. And so I would argue that drinking a glass of wine every night has less to do with the resveratrol and more to do with the stress reduction on a continuous basis. So, anyways.
So interesting. The blue zone research, right? Where those people live.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's diet stuff, more so. More diet stuff. Yeah, it's more diet stuff.
Where do people smoke a lot?
Everywhere but here. Yeah. We started it, spread it everywhere else, and then said it wasn't cool anymore. Everyone else was like, what the fuck? China's like, yo, we still smoke. Nicotine men make good times.
I have a question for you. Do you feel like you have a better descriptor of the subjective experience you're having when you're in quote unquote like the flow state? Like when you're writing,
Sure.
You wouldn't say you're happy, but I know you like writing.
Yeah, I enjoy writing. Well, I think one thing is the idea of learning how to enjoy a challenge. So I think a lot of people can get there quickly. Like a lot of people play video games because, so video games are designed to increase in difficulty proportional to people's willingness to, basically they extend intermittent reinforcement. So your first level is always easy and then they extend it a little bit more. And eventually, believe it or not, you'll have learned the behavior such that they can push it out so far they never need to reward you again, which is why people stay in abusive relationships. Like, in the beginning it's good, oh, I fucked up, oh, everything's good again, and then I fucked up more, and then it's good again, and then I fucked up more, and then it's good again, and then eventually it's never good again. But they got reinforced on enough spaces each time that they stay in it. And so, I think the difference between a video game and life is that interval isn't set. And so you're not necessarily going to have a quick win at level 1 because it's more like you basically get none until you're at level like 20 and then all of a sudden it all comes. And so I think that's the difficult part. And so I think being willing, I think athletes do particularly well, like college athletes do really well transitioning because they've learned a meta skill, which is that you're going to suck for a long time at something before you become a master at it. And most people don't have any experience mastering anything in life early on. And so they have to learn how to work. And so I think learning to work is the most useful thing that you can do. I mean, I think for me, I love finding input-output equations that equal like success of some kind. So it's like if you're giving public speaking, I'm going to give this example because it's perfect. So Caleb, who's on my team, had said years ago when we met, I don't really like public speaking, I don't like presenting, I don't like any of that stuff. I was like, cool. And I think he said something to the degree of like, I don't like it or I'm bad at it, whatever. And he did a presentation for the team and it was good. And then he had a bunch of things that he wanted to do better on the next one. Now, between those time periods, I had done the book launch. And so he had seen me prepare for my presentation. And so I did it 100 times over 30 days. So I did it 3 times a day before I gave the book launch. And when there was 500,000 people or whatever that were at the launch, when we had 500,000 people registered for the launch and I was about to step on stage, the team that was doing it all said, we do this every day and I've never seen anyone so like relaxed. And it wasn't a front, it was because I had done it so many times. And so fast forward, Caleb had another presentation he had to give. And this time he prepared 3 times as long. So he did, instead of 10 hours of prep, he did 30 hours of prep. And instead of having 80 slides, he had 330 slides. And the presentation went way better. And he noted that he wasn't nervous at all going into the second presentation compared to the first presentation. And so he messaged me afterwards and said, it wasn't that I was bad at speaking, I was just lazy. And I think that a lot of people mistakenly think they're bad at things. They haven't even learned how to try. And I do think learning how to try is also domain specific. And so like Caleb's an exceptional video editor and media strategist and great with building the team and those skills, but those have been skills that he knew how to work hard at. But this was a completely different skill. And so it's like writing. Like I have a lot of entrepreneur friends who are writing books now. Now they don't know that I come from a background of writing. I got a full writing scholarship to Tufts University, which is a good school. I got a personal letter from their writing scholar, like, we love all your stuff, we want you to be here. I ended up going to Vanderbilt, but like, I was the vice editor of the newspaper. I was the editor-in-chief of Literary Magazine when I was in high school. Like, I like writing. And so I know what hard work looks like in writing, which is just editing and editing and editing and editing, which is basically like doing the speech again and doing the speech again and doing the speech again. And it's the same as ping pong, which is 500 backhands, 500 forehands. It's just repetition, right? And so right now, if you're doing work or you feel like you're not as good at something, you have to figure out what the input-output equation is. You have to figure out like, what's the thing that I have to do a lot of? Because every skill is like this. is that there's a period where you have to do a lot of something. And if you don't know what it is, then you're not gonna get better. Sales is like, I have to do 100 calls a day. I have to do 10 conversations a day, whatever it is. You do that every single day and you do that for a year, you get pretty fucking good. And so you have to learn what that input-output equation is so that you can push as much. If it's me, once I know it, then I just jam as much input as I possibly can into that thing. And then that's where the whole quote that went viral was, confidence doesn't come from shouting affirmations in the mirror, by having a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Outwork your self-doubt. And so like you become confident by giving yourself the stack of evidence. The 100 times I went over the presentation, I felt confident going into that because I had a stack of proof that I'd already done it perfectly the last 20 times in a row that I'd done it. So why would 21 be different? And if you've had 1,000 sales calls on your 1,001st, if people are watching, they're like, man, you sound so confident. You're like, it's just how it is. It's not like I'm confident. I know what's going to happen next. And so I prefer to think about it as like, do it so many times you get bored of doing it. And like, that's when you'll look confident to everyone on the outside, because you'll have no emotional affect to the outcome, because you'll have recognized the patterns so many times that there's nothing that's going to surprise you. And I think that most people just don't know how to work that hard. Like, there is no way that anyone will know how hard I've worked on the books. Like, just imagine that there's a reason that they're all, all-time bestsellers for each of the categories they're in, and still. They're like, it's because you're following. It's like, no. You know why I know that? Look at every other fucking person who has a following, and their books don't fucking sell, even though they have a big following. They launch it, and then they stop selling. Why? Because the book sucked. They had a ghostwriter, they voiced it in, whatever. And they make their, $5 million or whatever it is.
They published on the second edit instead of the next.
Yeah, I mean, shit, they literally, they think the book is finished when it has reached the number of pages that creates a book. Like, I can write a book in 2 weeks if I was just trying to write a certain number of pages. But like, I've usually written 5 times the amount of pages as what actually comes out in the final draft. And I've rewritten end to end the whole thing, not once or twice, but like 10 times, end to end. But you know what happens when you do that? You get really fucking good at knowing what is important and what isn't. And you also give yourself way more outside life exposures that trigger new thoughts over that period of time that remind you of things that can make it better. And so it's kind of like like when you paint. It's like putting coats of paint and letting it dry. And so I kind of see editing drafts as like another coat of paint. And then you think, you're like, you know what? I just saw that. Like I went to a new area today and I saw this new yellow. I wonder if I could throw that in. If you had immediately shipped it, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to see the yellow thing because time didn't transpire during the creation of the thing. And so I think there's a reason that books that take 10 years to write look and read like they took 10 years to write. There's just a depth to the quality.
Do you then now, to bring this back kind of to like the happiness or whatever
I find happiness in figuring out what my input-output equation is and doing it as much as humanly possible.
Do you then engineer your environment to reinforce yourself to do more inputs?
Absolutely.
How do you do that?
You want to make it easy as possible to work as hard as you can. And so everything that is not that input-output equation is interference. And so like relationships, like, I mean, I said this before, but everything that you are not willing to sacrifice to be the best, the person who's best in the world is willing to and already has sacrificed. And so I'm not saying good or bad, do whatever you want. But if you want to be number one, and a lot of people say, I want to be the best. It's like, no, you don't. You want to be better, and you can be really good. You can be really good and not sacrifice plenty of things. But if you want to be the best, then you just have to assume that the best person in the world has the genetic predisposition, has all the environmental cues aligned with their ultimate goal, and is willing to give up everything that is not achieving that goal. And if you're not in that boat, then you're not going to be the best. People just like saying because it makes it feel good, but it's false. And so in terms of aligning the environment, if you know what the input-output equation, so for me, it's writing right now is the season that I'm in, because writing kind of is the pillar of everything else we do, content-wise, internal communications, the books, everything comes from me taking time to write, because I organize my thoughts better that way, not because I've become skilled at writing. So it's the best way, it's the most succinct way that I can communicate. And so the there's a reason that the first 6 hours of my day, when I'm freshest, most well rested, I have no meetings, and I have only one thing that I do, which is write. There's nothing else. And so if you know what the input-out equation is, find the time, the 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, that you can do that, and then allow nothing to interfere with it. And that's it. Like, nothing interferes with it. And if you do that for 5 years, you'll be really fucking good. And you'll be useful. And you'll feel good about it. Because the thing is, at a certain point, the work itself becomes reinforcing. Like when editors edit and then they make a change and then the story goes or the video goes the way they want it to, it's like, boom, that was reinforcing. And if I like work really hard on a paragraph and I could just shrink it to one sentence, I'm like, fuck yeah. And that literally might take 2 hours to just keep beating it down until I get it to like the one most succinct thing. But that's satisfying. And so in the beginning you suck and you do the reps so that you can learn the skills so that eventually you do the work itself because the work itself is rewarding. But that takes time to get to. Funny you say that, because the way that I immediately reframed that was that the perfectionism was around volume. Is like, that is what we are optimizing towards. And then we can't, because if we knew how people responded ahead of time to content, then we would make things differently than we do. But I, probably like you, am often surprised, pleasantly and sometimes unpleasantly, by the stuff that just grabs hold and then just goes, viral as hell in content. And so I think part of that is making up for our own ignorance by increasing volume. And so that would be like my reframe on the perfectionism there is like, we know that if we make 10 pieces of content, it is more likely that we will have more people see it than if we try really hard at one. And so we make 10 because the net benefit of the 10 is greater. Correct. And so that's the ideal that we commit to.
Tiago Forte has a fantastic take on this where he talks about perfectionism allows people to sit back and not produce work at a rate required to work out what actually works.
Have you heard the story of the pottery class? Oh, I feel like all right, wow. This feels like total modern wisdom.
Is this where someone comes in behind and then holds the thing in front?
So there's there's a teacher and he's got 2 classes that he teaches. And one class, he says, the only assignment for this whole semester is that you come back with a perfect clay pot. That's it. That's the assignment. The other class, he says, your objective is to make the most total quantity of clay pots and you'll be measured by how many pots you make. And at the end of the quarter, the pots that came from the team that had to just make sheer volume, not only did they make more pots, but the quality of all of their pots was better compared to the teams that only had to make one. And it just underlines the biggest lesson that I've learned in my life, which is that volume negates luck, is that you can try to be lucky and pick the one perfect thing and try and make it, but if you don't want to try and be lucky, you can just do so much fucking work that you will brute force your way to figuring it out. Like if you do 1,000 podcasts, you'll be pretty fucking good at podcasts, right? But if you try to say, okay, you're brand new and all you have to do is make one perfect podcast. The problem is that you don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment to say what is good, because you have zero data to base anything off of. And so you're basing your idea of a perfect podcast on something that you've literally never done before. And so doing the volume gives you the perspective to then have the best podcast at number 1,000 or 1,001. Anyways, I just thought you'd love the clay pot.
The whys are tough because I can never have insight into why other people do things rather than that they do them. But I would say that it seems like, at least I would say more men than women are money focused. And that is probably because more women than men are attracted to mates who have resources. And I love this quote by Idris Elba. He said, men fall in love with what they see, women fall in love with what they hear, which is why women will always wear makeup and men will always lie.
Oh man.
I just love the quote because it's like, it just, I think speaks to the heart of, how men and women, at least socially, measure status, which is kind of the second piece, which is people don't really want money, especially at the highest levels of the game. It's not about money at all. It's about status. Because it's only chicken and rice even at the highest levels. Like you can only eat so much food. You can't eat gold. You can't eat diamonds. And after a certain point, you can only consume so much. So then money's only purpose is to go make more money so that you can
do what?
Make more money. Right.
Do people care more about status, influence, or power with money?
Oh, is that like, do they?
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah. Do people care more about, do you think, having status, having influence, or having power?
I think it depends on the person, honestly. I mean, there's definitely, from everything that at least my beliefs are in the world, I think there are people definitely who prefer to be behind the scenes and moving things, making the world the way they want it to be. And then there are other people who prefer to have, and that's also huge influence. It's just one is credit with the influence, and sometimes it's credit without the influence, or the reverse. And so I don't know if I can answer for all of those people, but I think the motivations for making money can be diverse. But I think if I'd have generalized with the broadest brushstroke, I would say for men specifically, we get more status when we have more money.
Do you think that's what men are chasing more, is the status?
Totally.
Really?
Yeah. If women all of a sudden only want, if the hotness of the girl was directly correlated with how in shape the guy was, there'd be way more in shape guys. Right. I mean, let's flip the script, because we actually have some evidence on this. So like, if you look at gay men in general, men who are attracted to men, the gay population, I would say, has the stigma, and I say this is a positive, whatever a positive stigma is, of being more in shape than straight guys.
Really?
Yeah. Oh my God, there's way more, like tons of super in shape gay guys. Because men they fall in love with what they see, and they're both
physically fit. They're both
right, and so they're both men, and so gay men will have to be or try to be in better shape, I would say, on average, than straight men.
Right.
Because the person they're trying to attract has a different honey trap. You can be a fat slob, and if you're a billionaire, you're gonna get whatever girl you want. Okay, not necessarily whatever girl we want, but you will get a girl that you could probably still brag about.
Right. We're speaking in generalizations, but this is overall is what you're seeing here.
Yeah.
What do you think is keeping people trapped in staying average in their life, or not wanting to go beyond where they're currently at? Is it confidence, behaviors, skills, identity, beliefs, combination? What keeps people trapped in being average?
I think if you were to ask them, many of them would say something to the extent of, I'm afraid of failing, if you like peeled it back. But I actually think that's false. I don't think anyone's afraid of failing. I think everyone's afraid of other people seeing themselves fail and getting judged for it.
And that's what's keep people trapped.
Right, because what it is a loss of status. Right, they're afraid of a loss of status, and you have there's short-term pain that you have to go through when you do anything new. Unless you're immediately successful, which almost no one is, you usually have to take a step back in order to take 2, 3, 10 steps forward, right? Like if you have a high-paying job, so I was a consultant, for example, and I had all the status for somebody at my age, working at a big firm. I graduated in 3 years. I had all that stuff. But then when I quit that to start basically being a personal trainer at a gym, that was a big decrease in status in terms of my like relative standing compared to my peers.
Because now you're starting something new. You have to break into an industry, and now you don't have credibility and relationships. Totally. You have to sell yourself all over again as a beginner. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, and I remember when I would have women come to the gym and be like, "Did you go to college?" And I was like, "I mean, I graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt." Yeah, you know what I mean. But like, I remember thinking, "Wow, this doesn't matter at all."
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all. And so I was really well equipped for not what I was doing.
You were overqualified.
Yeah, and underqualified at the same time. Right, for the actual job. And so there's a big pill of humility that I think a lot of people aren't willing to take, because it hurts to drop in status. Like, people are like, "Oh, you'll get there, man." Like, "Hey, we're rooting for you." And it's interesting because I remember in the early days at the gym when I was like sleeping on the floor. A lot of my clients were like, "Good for you, chasing your dream," all that stuff, like really rooting for me. And, within 9 or 12 months, I had hired some people and I had a manager, and I was able to not literally live at the gym, sleep there. And I remember pulled up one day and I walked in, and like 4 or 5 of the ladies who'd been there for a while were like, "Boss man's here." Like, "I thought you were too good for us." And they were saying it in jest, but I knew that there was like a hair of truth to it. And that was when I realized the truism, like, everyone wants you to do well, but just not better than them. And so the people that will continue to root for you tend to be above you. And as you pass people, because hate only comes from below. Like, no one above you is hating on you because they're not thinking about you. Because winners focus on the goal, losers focus on winners. And so
in the beginning, you start start the journey because you have this big ultimate payoff you want to have, but that's way too far out to actually wait. Like, you have to be an exceptional person who's been reinforced in the past for waiting for a very long period of time. That's why I say the athletes thing is kind of interesting, because they've had to wait a long period of time, and so they have to practice for a long period before they get the thing. But typically, they get enough reinforcers early on that the act itself becomes reinforcing. And that's what mastery is you transition from having some sort of external motivator to external. I believe all motivators are external, but from the work itself being intrinsically rewarding versus having a carrot of some kind that's been artificially put there, like status or an award or number one or a ranking. And masters enjoy the work more than novices do. So it's actually easier for masters.
Do you find, ironically, that hard work has felt less hard these days? Or is it still hard work because you're pushing it?
It's still hard. It's different in terms of the hard. I would say the hard thing that I have now is that my level of quality, the standard that I have, is only mine. Like, I know that I could probably put out the first draft and it would probably be a bestseller. It's just that I would know that it could have been better. And that would eat me alive. And so the hard part is still maintain. So it's actually, the hard part for me now is that I maintain my standard as the number one standard that I optimize for. And if the world so chooses to also like it, great. But it also divorces me somewhat from the outcome. Because if it were just about getting the best-selling book, then I would publish it on the first shot. Because at this point, I do have enough skill that it probably would be a bestseller on its own. But I also think there's a difference between being a bestseller for a season and being a bestseller for 100 years. And so I'm trying to write these books to be bestsellers when I'm dead, so they're still useful.
All right, next one. Here's how to get older without getting better. Keep relearning the same lesson. If you keep making the same mistake over and over, the mistake isn't the problem. You are.
So I define learning by same condition, new behavior. And so when you go to a video game and you battle through the level and you battle the boss, if you keep doing the same thing to the boss and you keep losing, then you have not learned, because you have the same condition and the same behavior. And so I often say that, like, for anyone who's listening to this podcast, if the goal is to get better and you're like, man, I really want to learn something from this podcast. If you listen to this podcast and then you're in the same exact conditions as you were before, and then you do not change your behavior, you learned nothing. And so using that definition has at least allowed me to change my behavior faster, which then goes into rate of learning, which I define as intelligence. And so a lot of people are like, man, he's so smart, but he just doesn't. It's like, well, then if he doesn't change his behavior and he's in the same conditions, he's a dummy. He's not that smart. And so if you are trying to battle the same boss over and over again, and you don't change what you're doing, and the boss keeps beating you, then it's not the game's problem. It's your problem. You are the problem. And I think that's like, if you continue, I talked about, obviously I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, but I usually do this when I have a crowd. I just say, like, hey, raise your hand if you work all the hours of the day. And a lot, most of the crowd raised their hand. I say, okay, who here has been stuck at the same revenue level for 6 months or more? And then I say, keep the hands up. And, like, honestly, most of the time the same hands are raised. I say, you're doing the wrong shit. Like, if you put all your inputs and the outputs haven't changed, then you have the same condition and the same behavior, and so you have learned nothing. And so that has always just been my reframe. And so over time, if you're moving up in entrepreneurship, you're moving up in career, your behavior should change, because it means you've learned.
Exposure to information isn't learning.
Great TLDR. Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And it's the same with memory. It's literally the way that memory works. The best way to work out how the human memory system works is repeated recall, not repeated exposure, right? You have to drag it out of memory and use it, not just see it a million times. And this is kind of the same thing with the lesson. It's, you can listen to any of the podcasts that exist on the internet, or the ones that we've done, or the ones that you love, or whatever. And if you don't apply anything, it's a waste of time. And this is the best solution for this is Tim Ferriss's The Good Shit Sticks. look, what's the thing from the podcast or the book or the audiobook or the whatever that you read or listened to that you can't stop thinking about? That you go to bed and you think about it, that you took a screenshot or a screen recording and sent it in the group chat, that you like texted your mum about it at 3 a.m. Oh, this really explains the way that I felt in school, or the way that I felt when such and such broke up with me, or whatever. That's the thing. That's the thing to focus on. But a lot of the time, the problem with mental masturbation is that the amount of information you can intake versus the amount of change that you can deploy is asymmetric.
Yeah, when I was getting started in my entrepreneurial journey, and I would say this is like this, I was when I was an entrepreneur, right? Like I hadn't quit my job yet. I started reading all these self-help books, and I remember reading like, it was probably like my 10th book in a row, and I realized that the words in that book contradicted like the second self-help book that one was like, it's all about goals, the other one's like, it's all about taking steps or whatever it was, right? And I all of a sudden I was like, my life is the same. I've read all these books, but I still literally live in the exact same condo in Baltimore doing the same job. Like nothing has changed. And so I just made the commitment that whatever the next book that I was going to read, I would just not read another book until I'd done everything in that book. And that's when I quit my job and I did a whole bunch of other things. And I've actually more or less stuck with that in terms of like, when I read books or even listen to podcasts, I usually do it with an intention to get something out of it. And I usually have notes up. And so my intake on information, because I get asked a lot, I'm sure you do. Like, I actually don't read that much. I definitely don't read nonfiction. I read like fantasy every once in a while.
Red Rising, baby.
That's right. But it's because usually I get overwhelmed with the amount of things I would have to do. And so I'm like, I don't need more information. I'm good. Like I could read a chapter and be like, all right, that's it. It'll take me 2 weeks to do this. And so then like the rest of the time is doing that. And so
how do you ensure that the things that you're reading are giving you good advice? Because if you didn't move on before you took 2 weeks to go and do the thing, but the thing was dog shit, you've spent 2 weeks going backward.
So I would make the argument that I wouldn't have gone backwards because I would have gained the experience. And so I would have more context to know what the second thing was going to be. And that's just kind of like the trial by fire, learning through iteration. And I think I tend to do more of that.
Sort of a win or learn philosophy.
Yeah. And I would say that like there are entrepreneurs who are definitely like super, super duper planners. And there are entrepreneurs who are more like, let's just move and break shit and we'll figure it out. I tend to be really this on the micro in terms of like move shit and break, like we'll figure it out as we go. And I just tend to be a planner only in the big, like very grand, like what do I really want to do in 10 years? But the majority of the time it's like, let's see. And we'll learn. I've learned so much of the content that I have comes from just fucking up in business. And people are like, this is such original content. I was like, this is just because that's what my life was. I made this mistake and it didn't work. But I said this one thing one time and then all these people bought and I was like, ooh, how do I do that again? And so like, it was always through iteration. And I've read all these books, but there's just knowing how, knowing that and knowing how. Like knowing that maybe this works, maybe. But once you do it, it's a different type of learning where, at least for me, it's been that way. You could read 100 books on sales, but when you take your first cold call, all of that goes out the window because you actually have to sell
that stuff a lot. But the closer people are to you when you're at your bottom, the more they'll root for you at the bottom. But as you pass them in whatever material thing your pursuit is, you remind them of the dreams. This is some paraphrasing of a conversation I had with Chris Williamson. You remind them of the dreams that they gave up on. And so you go from being the person who reminds them that they could go after their dreams to reminding them that they never went after them to begin with. And then what happens, at least this has been my experience, is that you go through this period where no one from your hometown or who knew you in the beginning approves. And then what happens is absolute strangers from the internet who never saw the beginning become a bigger fan of you because they can relate to the story. But because you weren't their next door neighbor, they don't feel blame for them not having achieved whatever yet. Because if everyone in your friend group, when you're coming up, they all see that, like, as on some level, in my opinion, they see that they have the exact same access to resources, opportunities that you do. And then for some reason they haven't done something. So it's painful because I think there's some sting of inadequacy that they probably self-judge as a result of that. Now, to be fair, plenty of people are secure and are very happy with their lives, which is awesome. But I think there's definitely some people who aren't as pumped about it, which then kind of gets into, like, to go all the way back to the very beginning. We say, like, why don't people do the stuff that they want to do? I think it's because they can't even hear their own voice, because the only voice they can hear is everyone else's, and they can, like, theirs is barely a whisper. And so I think, like, if I had to give myself a goal of what my story or journey or trajectory has been, it's been to make my voice the loudest one that I can hear, and for my approval of myself to be the one that I care the most about. I think Epictetus said something to the degree of, if you need someone else to bear witness to whatever the thing is, you should be able to be your own witness. You should have enough integrity and belief in self. I'm massively paraphrasing, but he said that, and I like when I've had really tough times, I write in this diary to myself, and it's to my 85-year-old self. And so, okay, you might really find this interesting. I think your audience will.
I do like this.
So there's something called the Solomon paradox. Are you familiar with this?
Explain it.
Okay. So the Solomon paradox basically states that humans give better advice to other people than they follow themselves.
Yes.
And like they've proven, they whitewash stats. They even describe people's own life to themselves, but change the names, etc., and then say, what should this person do? And what they recommend the person do differs from what the person actually does. And it's because we have some sort of emotional context of the situation, and so then we can make logical decisions as a result, and so then we make poor decisions, right? So take that as data point one. We give better advice to other people than we follow to ourselves. The second, kind of issue that I've had overall is I've never had a lot of success with the therapies and things like that personally. A lot of the time it's because I feel like I have to, one, provide huge amounts of context for a single decision, which becomes 90% of my conversation is just trying to give context around.
And then the session's over.
Right, exactly.
Like where we're going, yeah.
And the third part is aligned incentives, right? And I speak purely from a mechanistic perspective here, which is that if you pay someone, they want you to continue to see them.
100%.
It just is what it is. And Charlie Munger, I think, said people will ignore all sorts of facts if their paycheck relies on it, right? Like he thinks the entire wealth management industry is just a complete farce. And so he uses that as his example because he's like, they're incentivized to not see that they have no value add. Right. And so everyone rationalizes around that. And so you've got this misaligned incentive, you've got someone who doesn't have context, and you've also got this idea that we can give ourselves better advice than anyone else can. And so in thinking about those three things together, I was like, maybe I can be my own therapist, but don't do it from myself today. Talk to my 85-year-old self. And so I actually run these chats. It's my first morning meeting on Monday every week. It's called Solomon Time. And so I talk about what's on top of mind. Now I also
to self.
Yeah. So I chat it's like a DM chat. So it's like, hey, this is what's going on right now. And then it's future me, like my hat changes, and it's this is well, what would you why are you saying that? Like, what,
you psychologically go into that state of a future you.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
And it's cool because that version of me,
it's not AI you. It's
just me. That version of me has a completely aligned incentive. He wants me to win.
Yes,
more than anyone. Because at the end of the day, like, people don't want what's in your best interest. They want the version of you that best serves them at any level. Now, the closer they are, like your family has tremendous alignment, because if you become a billionaire, they all benefit.
Yes.
Probably.
But they've got doubts and insecurities.
For sure. So like they're still flawed compared to a stranger, right? So it's like the closer someone gets, the more natural alignment would occur, where if you do well, they might do well by proxy, or by extension, you might be able to give them a favor, et cetera. And so that's why when you get famous, I can't remember what this quote is, but like when you get famous, it's actually other people, I think, who treat you differently, because you actually have more utility, because they might be willing to put up with stuff. You're late, you're not as responsive, all these things, because if you tweet their name, it changes their life, because there's that chance of huge utility. And so people change their behavior. And so anyways, with Solomon, who I call my older version of myself just for simplicity's sake, he has absolute aligned incentives. He has complete context. So I don't need to explain everything. He already knows everything I know, right? And potentially more, and a longer term time horizon. And as I'm going through these exercises, the most common ones, the common responses I get is, what problem are we solving? Which is, what classic old me would say. Number two is, are you sure that's a problem? Which is more just a retort. And recently I had a really tough thing that I went through, and it like really probably the worst day I'd had in 5 years. So from the last time I felt that bad was when my partner had taken all the money that I had in my account after I sold all my gym. So sold everything, and then all the money was drained. That was like that was the worst day I had in a long time. So I had one recently, and he said this line to me, and this is kind of what I go through when I'm trying to think through these kind of like, we have these vicious cycles where you just keep reliving a conversation or scenario, and you're like, I just want to shake this, right? Even sometimes it's, you have a relationship and you break up with a person and you're like, I want to get over this person, whatever it is. I usually need to get to this statement, and once I get it, it solves it. It's like, I just need a frame shift. And I remember when I was getting over someone a very long time ago, I'm married 7 years now, but the statement that I needed for that situation was, you can only have one love of your life, but you can live multiple lives. And I really liked that. I thought it was very beautiful. Like, you don't have to negate a relationship or the positive, because what would you want to do? Destroy every memory you've had except for the person that you get married to? That's terrible. That means that every moment you've had in your life before that was bad, which is not, I don't think that's the right way to reconstruct your memory. It's like, I'm different now than I was then. So I've lived multiple lives, and I'm sure, like, if I look at my life, I've had clear chapter, I'm sure you in the NFL, right? Like, just, you're a different person now.
Yes.
And so it would make sense that you can have a love of your life then, you can have a love of your life now. And that was like, as soon as I got that, it was like, I get it. That was my frame shift. And so with this particular bad scenario that happened, I had worked really, really hard for something, like very, very hard. And something had gone wrong that was outside of my direct control. Now I can still say everything is under my control to a degree, and I can learn from that.
It's like a business deal went wrong, or something, lost a lot of money, or
exactly. I lost $15 million
in a day.
Yeah, it was a deal. So I mean,
right.
And so Solomon just said this statement to me, and he said, "I know everything that you did, and no one else will know, and I approve, and my approval is enough."
Wow.
Period. And so,
whose approval were you wanting in that moment?
Right.
For it not to go through.
Right. Other people's, whatever it is. And so, if the ultimate goal of my life, at least as I say it, is to become the best version of me that I can, then it makes sense that to become the best version of me, I have to suffer. I have to go through hardships. I have to fail. Because no one who literally wins all the time becomes, like, you don't build character through good times, you build it through hard times. And so it's like, if I want to have strong character, then I have to be willing to pay the price tag, like the $500 Nikes. Like, the price tag for the $500 shoe of a human that I want to be is tough stuff. And so I have put a lot of effort into only judging myself on my actions, not my feelings around the actions or the outcomes. And so I'll give you a micro example. So I am typically a pretty impatient person. I always want things now. I want it yesterday.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I've been slowly over time, people have begun to describe me as a patient person, which, it's just as surprised as I am. You're like, I don't know about that. And so a huge breakthrough for me was that I could feel impatient and still do the actions that align with patience, and then be patient as a result. And I think that works with, any of this. Like, you can feel unloving, you can feel angry and still act loving, and it doesn't mean you're unloving. Now that diverges from a lot of classical religious thought. So that's, a lot of sin is in the mind, etc. So like, I tend to reject that because I would rather somebody really, really be mean to me in their head and do only nice things.
right.
If I had to pick.
Yeah.
Right.
As opposed to be mean in their head and do mean things.
Right.
It's like,
that's worse.
Yeah.
Right, but then the flip side is, would you rather somebody like really love you and then only make your life harder? That's the real one. Right? Because a lot of times we are that person.
99% of the time, we're that to ourselves.
And we tell ourselves, well, I had good intentions, but it's like, but you ended up hurting that person. So what matters?
And we hurt ourselves more than anything.
And so, anyway, so that has been my framework that has served me really well.
How do you know when you've met that bar? Like, how do you know when a sentence is like...
When there's nothing else I can do to it to make it better.
You sleep on it, and then you wake up the next day and you look at it again.
There's nothing else I can do to it to make it better. Same thing for the presentation. There's nothing else I can do to make this better. I can't practice it more. Because even at a certain point, if you get past a certain point of practicing, you start knowing it almost too well that you start cutting corners, because you're like, it gets too natural. Like I borderline over prepared for the GMATs. I like peaked, because I took tests every week, and my English score peaked before my math score did. So my math score peaked at the test, but my English score, I had done it so many times where you're like, shoot, man, you recognize so many patterns that you're like, man, which pattern is this one? Because like, I'm so good at all of them, I have to remember what, like, you peak, right? And so there is a point where it's not even diminishing returns, you actually start getting worse, at least in my opinion, or at least in my experience. And so, if you regress something down to its simplest form and then I just cut the sentence in half, I lose material. I lose stuff that needs to be there. And so you get it as simple as possible, but no simple.
You talked about if someone comes to you and you're like, what would you do if you had 6 more hours on that? Mm-hmm. You kind of flip back on that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so a really fun thought exercise for somebody who's just like, all of this is like, wow, that's so much work. I'm not really prepared for that. Well, I'll walk you through what it looks like in a micro example. So if a video editor comes to me and says, hey, do you like this clip? And I say, yeah, I do like the clip. If you had another 2 hours to work on it, what would you do? And they're like, well, if I had another 2 hours, I'd do this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, go do that, come back. They come back and I'm like, do you think it's better? And they say, yeah. They show it to me and I'm like, it is better. Okay. Now, if you had another 2 hours, what would you do? They're like, well, I do this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, cool. They come back, same conversation. They're like, okay, if you had a week, what would you do? Well, then they're like, well, shoot, I'd probably scrap this whole style overall and I'd actually make a totally new framework for how I'd approach the video. And I'd want to come at it from this angle altogether. It would just take, a lot more work, but I think it would still make a better outcome. It's like, okay. So that idea, just do it on 5 years. And so, everybody just wants to get it done rather than get it right. And getting it right is where all the money is.
I bet you've asked yourself, like, what would you do if you had 50 years to work on acquisition?
100%, and I do it in 50 years. And I do what I'm doing.
Yeah. And not trying to chase the quick reinforcement.
Sure. Well, it's the quick external loop, but I mean, like at a certain point, you start to develop mastery even around pursuing goals. So, like I've had enough past, like this is book 3 from the $100 million series. Every month, I get thousands of reviews and DMs and people who say their lives changed from their first 2 books. The hard part was book 1 when I have none of that for a year and a half. But once that one's out, leads, I'm like, well, I'm getting reinforcement every day from my writing. And so I write. And so now I have 2 books worth of that. And once the 3rd book's out, there'll be 3 books worth of that. So maintaining that gets easier and easier just because I have regular reinforcement for writing, not necessarily this book, but writing in general. And so that then means I can generalize past good experiences onto how I act and work now. That's why, like, you become an expert at pursuing goals because you have pursued goals in the past. I just use writing as an example, but I've pursued goals in the past, and sticking it out has had big payoffs. And so when I feel like I'm sticking it out again, I'm reminded of the past times I've stuck it out and it's been worth it. The hard part is for the people who haven't stuck anything out because they've never seen it work. And so the first one's always the hard one. It's like you just have to have faith on some level. You just have to fucking believe that it'll work out. And the thing that carries you over the bridge in the short term is that you are getting better. And if you can just focus on that, then even if the crowd doesn't cheer when you give your presentation or you don't sell books or whatever it is, you'll know. And so it's funny because I look back at the presentation that I gave 5 years ago and I really am embarrassed. But I'm not embarrassed at the effort I put in then. Because the effort I put in then, I really did think it was really good. I just didn't know what good could be. Because I also gave myself 20 hours rather than 200 hours. And so if I only had 20 hours, maybe that is the best I can do. And maybe today that's still the best I could do. I just give myself way more time. But the problem with giving yourself way more time once you see how much good can be, is that you realize how few projects you can do. Which is why you just have to be, that's why like the biggest guys and the biggest business titans in the world talk so much about focus, because it's not that like focus is the thing, it's just that it takes so much fucking time to do something right that you can't do more than one thing.
So it might be almost part of that, like, I know we keep saying the word happiness, but like happiness equation, to have less things that you're trying to optimize for in your set of things that you're working on.
if you want to be exceptional at something, it means you have to put a lot of input into it, and you can't be exceptional at very many things because of how many inputs you have and how limited they are. So if time is an input, we all have the same amount of time. And if it takes a huge amount of that time to get good at one thing, then if you take that as the assumption we're basing this on, then there's just not many things you can get very good at. And so then it takes some level of selection to be like, what thing do I want to get good at?
How does the 1 of 0 brand fit into this?
Well, the 1 of 0 brand is very much aligned with this. I should have my nose strip on. I took it off this morning. You just pasted on. The whole idea was, it's so funny. I saw the background of my gym. It said that picture that I posted of like one of my first video content. Yeah. It said the back of the wall. I made this quote up. I painted it. You can see how ugly the paint is in the back wall. It says, strength doesn't come from what? Strength doesn't come from doing what you think you can, but doing what you think you can't, is what I think it says. Which I don't agree with the word strength. It should be growth. But anyways, I like the idea. And so I think that 1 of 0 is very much like that, which is, 1 of 1 is doing something that only you can do. 1 of 0 is doing something that you've never done before, and that ideally no one else could do. And so it's an amount of work that most people just don't comprehend. And it's really hard to even describe it, because like I can say I spent 6 hours a day for 18 months on this one project, and people nod their heads. But spend 6 fucking hours on one thing once, and then do it 500 times. And then like you'll start to see like the soul crushing amount of effort that it takes to stick with it. Now I've been able to extend how long I work on projects, because just like the abusive husband thing or the abusive spouse thing, like in the beginning you can have a short project, you get a win. I can work a little longer the next time. I can work a little longer the next time. Books, really good books, are one of the hardest projects to do because you get almost zero reinforcement. It's very punishing for most of the time until, quote, the end. But the process itself, there is some sort of joy in being the type of person who is able to endure that. Because I have a lot of entrepreneur friends who are like, oh, I just finished my book. I'm gonna write a book just like you did. I was like, no, you won't. No, you won't.
They're not one of them.
No. They're like, it worked well for him, I'll do that too. His book was so good, I'll write one too. Doesn't work that way. They've never even written anything. So they're starting at like where I was when I was 15. And I would say the same degree, it's probably like people who look at Mr. Beast now and are like, oh, I'll just go make YouTube videos. Like he started when he was 13. And he's been spending more than 6 hours a day trying to make videos since then. And so there's just like so much depth of knowledge that you can get that just takes time. But the thing is from the happiness perspective, I find a lot of joy in excellence. And I think that work well done provides dividends forever. So if we were to think about like subjective well-being or like purpose or meaning or utility or usefulness, any of those, whatever one you want to optimize for, like I am proud of the first book I wrote. I'm proud of the second book I wrote. I'm proud of the third book I wrote. And I'm proud of the book that I'm writing right now. And when I look back on them, every time I see them and I see people benefit from them, I get a reward for a one-time input. Even though it was a year, for the rest of my life, I will get rewarded for that effort. And so it just encourages me more and more to do things the right way. And I think people who build exceptional products think about products the same way, which is like, it has to be right. It just has to. It's all the 100 details. It's not the big idea. It's the 100 details that make the difference between, like the Mr. Beast videos versus other people who try to be like Mr. Beast. It's 100 details that make his videos better.
Yeah, it's not like one caption.
Yeah, it's not just the thumbnail, right? Like it's not that. It's 100 things. You are source in that situation. And so everyone is there for like a subset of you, and they require you to live. You don't require them. And the equal opposite is, I think we should be more fearful of when everyone stops copying you. Like the day that no one copies you is far, far more frightening than the day everyone's copying you.
Yeah. Jimmy Carr refers to China as a cover band. You know, it's like they're the cover band of the Beatles. And he says, you know, they're good and in many ways they're able to produce things at more scale and so on and so forth, but they're not driving the innovation forward in that same way.
Yeah, the idea of getting upset about people copying is just ridiculous. Like, yeah, that's all. That's all.
But you understand why it's painful, right? If someone's gone through, okay, let's test and test and test and test and test, and then finally find a particular formula that works, and then 10 people downstream get the benefit of this hard, laborious, effortful, late night grind and iteration, and they just got to be like, oh, that thing.
Yeah. So I think that like they'll be able to copy what they can see, but they won't be able to copy what they can't see, which is understanding why each of those pieces are in place. And when something changes in the future, they won't be able to iterate from there because they don't know why it was there in the first place.
Why.
Right. And so like, I mean, I've obviously dealt this with in a business context where like real dollars are at stake. And so like in the gym world, you know, gym launch, for those who don't know, I had a big licensing company. We had 5,000 locations. And anyways, so we had basically business processes that we would, you know, iterate and figure out why this worked. And so then I used to keep a list of names, and then it got too long and tiresome to keep the names of all the people who tried to take the stuff and then sell it as their own. I say their names every night before I go to bed. You think I don't remember you? I remember all of you. Yeah. And so none of them 10 years later are still around. And none of them even came to a 10th of the size of Gym Launch. And it was because it wasn't theirs. Like the person that I would be far more afraid of, somebody who comes out with a significantly better system than what we had to help gyms make more money and help their clients more. But like to this day, like there still isn't one, and that one's Gym Launch is still the category king in that industry. And so it's like and that's because we were talking about this earlier, everything is an R&D for us. And so we actually were the only licensing company that had an R&D department, and we would test, we call them plays, but we test plays every 14 days. And so we'd spend 50 or 100 grand on just a test. We'd be like, all right, let's test this new marketing campaign. Or we'd say, hey, let's test this new high ticket sales process. Or hey, what if we tried to sell memberships via chat? Let's just give it a shot, see what happens. And honestly, 70% of the time, it was worse than the control. Like it didn't work as well. And what we would do is we'd present it to the licensees and say, hey guys, guess what we just spent 50 grand on that you don't have to spend money on? Look at the results of this sell membership
Total
via
dog
chat.
shit.
Yeah. The thing is that most people are actually really happy to know that it didn't work, because it felt like they were scratching an itch. They're like, oh great, I don't have to do that one. Yeah. Like someone did that test for me. So anyways, all that to say, unless you have that trail of bodies behind you that led you to figure out this one thing, when there is a kink in the system because some external condition changes, which it always will, they then don't know, which means you're always still going to be ahead.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, because if you understand the physics of the system, if you understand the dynamics of why you're doing the things that you're doing, and something changes, you can respond. But it goes back to people with high standards. You have to presume that you win in the weeds.
Yeah.
You have to presume that you win in the weeds. And if you do, and if you're continuing to be this close to it, as soon as things change, you go, that's interesting. Why has that happened? And that then allows you to continue to iterate.
And you see it, because you're in the weeds, right? Somebody who's all the way zoomed out, just like, copy paste that. They're like, they're late because they have to see that it's working consistently. So they're already 3-6 months behind. Then they start trying to figure out how to implement it. And then they start implementing it. And then what they don't see is the things that made the conditions that made it work to begin with. And so like, if you just assume that you're always in the lead, then it means sure, 2nd through 10th place will always copy number 1, but to the victor go the spoils. And so you will, no one gives a shit who is 4th place at the Olympics.
Reminder that if you want to be exceptional, you're going to be different from everyone else. That's what makes you exceptional. You can't fit in and also be exceptional. Both have discomfort. When you fit in, you have internal conflict because you're not being 100% you. When you're exceptional, you have external conflict because everyone sees you as different. Pick one. When your friends start to say, you've changed, remember it's because they don't know how to say, you've grown.
I define words a lot because it helps me kind of make sense of the world. And exceptional is like an obvious one, right? We use the word exceptional like you are not like everyone else. But even saying it like that, like you are not like everyone else. And so if someone says you're not like everyone else, then you can just reframe that as like, I am exceptional. And that's not a bad thing. And I actually think that most people have, like, this might be counter to most people's beliefs, but I think most people have the potential to be exceptional. And because most people are peculiar in their own way. They just stifle that because they want to be accepted by most people, but in so doing, never accomplish what they want to do because they conform. And so, like, if there's probably a lot of things about the world or even your world around you that you're like, this never made sense to me, but then you do it anyways. And I think that a lot of innovation and a lot of what makes people exceptional is feeling, thinking that thought or seeing that thing and then being like, I don't think I'm going to follow that rule anymore. Like, why do I need to shower twice a day? Like, I don't know. Like, why do I need to wear different clothing? Like, there's just a lot of these social norms that people, usually pass down to us, or they're, bred into us in high school and college and things like that. But it's like, you see a guy who, wears a cowboy hat and dresses a certain way, and he basically wants to say, I am this archetype of person. But if cowboy boots aren't as comfortable for you as New Balances are, and you know that, and you still wear cowboy boots, I would call you a fraud. Because like, that is like, it's like a micro rebellion against yourself.
Yep.
It's like there is, and like, I look at old people a lot because usually they don't give a shit anymore. They've just like given up. And there was a survey that they did where the number one reason that old people like don't have as much drama and they're happier is they cited they literally don't have time for it. Like, literally, they don't have time for it. And I found that so interesting. And I was like, well, if I'm going to eventually be that way when I'm 80, I might as well just start being that way now. And so they usually wear like really comfortable footwear, and like they keep their surroundings, like whatever weird peculiarities they have, they just accept them. And so I think a lot of if life is a long journey of self-acceptance, I think the earlier you can accept your own peculiarities as just part of you, rather than trying to justify them or mold to the archetype that you think is acceptable within your social circle. At least for me, like, there's this period of discomfort when you change anything because everyone around you wants you to fit within the label that they are comfortable with.
But they also have the anchor of what you were before.
Yeah, exactly. And so they try and like, they people don't like that. And so they're like, no, I like you in this box. So just say, I know you're having a little thing right now. Don't worry. Just, and they just want to shove you back into it. And there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that you have to have where it becomes really socially awkward. And so like I said one the other day about like going home for the holidays, and the reason I don't like doing it is because often I have to confront a lot of people that I haven't seen in a long time, and they'll speak to me in a way that I don't like. And before that, I would roll it off like, whatever, no big deal. But I don't accept that.
Didn't you torpedo a family holiday a couple of years ago?
Many.
Yeah, I think, but that's when your friends start to say you've changed, it's because they don't know how to say you've grown.
And because they see so few people who have, so it makes sense that they don't have that. So I see that as a lack of skill, not malice. Like, it's not that they're bad people, they just don't even know it because so few people do change.
Yeah.
So few people do grow.
How can we then build confidence if we don't understand the skill of confidence and we've never had it?
Okay, I love this. So, statement that has gone incredibly viral is that you don't build confidence by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but by giving yourself a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Outwork your self-doubt. And so I wholeheartedly reject the notion that you can beat your chest and have charisma, because I believe that confidence without evidence is delusion. Like, if someone says, I can build a skyscraper, and they can say it as confidently as they want, but if they don't know how to build a skyscraper, they're not building a skyscraper. And the best way to know that you can build a skyscraper is having built one before. Now you might be like, well, what about the first skyscraper? It's like, well, of course, he didn't build a skyscraper first. He probably built a half skyscraper before that,
or a house,
before that,
and then,
an apartment building, and before that, like a fourplex, right? You build to it, and that concept for me is what has allowed me to do well in situations where I feel like I didn't deserve to do well, right? Like, so for the book launch that we were talking about earlier before we got on, like, if you have 500,000 people, it's a whole city, right? And I truly, and people you can watch the vlog, like, I truly wasn't nervous. And it wasn't because I'm some czar at presenting. It was because I had done the presentation full 3 times a day for the 30 days leading up to it. So I had done it once in my mind, once out loud and recorded it. And then I would watch the recording and then edit my slides.
Every day.
Every day.
Wow.
And so when I got there, the staff was like, I've never seen, I'm sharing this because it one of the hardest things to do is have context when you don't know anyone else who's doing what you want to be doing in your life. And I'm not saying I'm the person that people are trying to emulate. I'm just saying that maybe there's an element of that they can take from it, which is when I got there, the staff was like, I've never seen anyone so calm for something so big. And that was like shaking them. I was like, you're good. We're good.
Yeah,
it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And the reason was, I was like, I've done this before. I know how this presentation goes. I can say it backwards. And so I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say because I have outworked my self-doubt. And until I felt like, of course, this is always how it is, then you don't feel like, I remember, I'll rewind to the first time Outwork Your Self-Doubt came out in my life. So I gave this presentation to a very small room, 50 people. And a lady in the front row said, you sound so certain. Like, how do you get rid of the imposter syndrome? And I had just given a presentation on how our sales process worked at our brick and mortar gyms. And I said, first of all, I was like, I don't really understand the question. I was like, I'm just presenting what is. I was like, there's not really an opinion. You can't be like, Alex, you didn't do that. I was like, I mean, that is what I did. Like, this is the exact process. These are the pages. These are the follow-up scripts. This is how we schedule. This is how we, everything. And so there was nothing to contest. And so if I want to make sure that I'm confident in a situation, then let's define confidence as the percentage likelihood that I do what I say I'm going to do. And so I said I was going to present this thing, and I want to make sure that I control the controllables. And so for me, because Solomon is always watching, because if I got up there, because I do have, at this point, I have presented enough times that I could probably still do a good job. And I think many people would be like, that was awesome. And with not a lot of prep. But I would know, and Solomon would know, and he wouldn't be proud of me. And so it's the double-edged sword of like, to make that man proud, the bar is so high for what I have to do that his bar is higher than everyone else's. And so if there are hateful comments or there are whatever, it's like, your approval isn't the one that I'm going for.
Right.
And so it shields you because that's why you have earned my approval, and that is enough. And so like, that's been my shield during that process. And we can talk about the launch stuff later, but there was a key moment, right, where like, it looked like the world was burning down during the launch.
Really?
Oh yeah. Well, cause it was a faux pitch. So I looked like I was doing a huge stack and, price anchoring and adding all these bonuses, and everyone's like, oh my God, he's a sellout, blah, blah, blah. Like, it completely turned. And then I gave it away for free. But for 15 minutes, I could see the chat.
This guy's, yeah.
And
this is a sales pitch.
Yeah. And I genuinely felt absolutely at peace about it because 1, I knew where we were going. And 2, I had done this before. And so me walking through that process is like, it doesn't require confidence. It appears like confidence on the outside, but if everyone saw the amount of hours that went into it, it would seem obvious. And so I think that's the big misnomer, is that people are like, he's so confident. Either the guy is confident because he is delusional, and I mean that is in the truest sense, like he is claiming he can do something that he has no evidence that he can do, which to me would be delusional. Or he had lots of insecurities or concerns about his performance on XYZ, and then he tried to simulate that experience as many times as he possibly could until he no longer felt afraid. And so like, if you want to get rid of a fear of spiders, the way you do that is you lock yourself in a room with spiders, and eventually, and
either that makes you more terrified, or eventually
you acclimate.
Right, eventually.
And then you walk out and you're like, I can deal with spiders.
Or you're traumatized. Either
over
way.
a long enough time horizon, you'd get over it, because you'd realize that you didn't die.
Yes.
You'd wake up from a panic attack, and then you'd have another one, and then you have another one, and then eventually, like, here I am. I'm still
Live with
here.
the spiders. Yeah, exactly.
I'm Spider Boy, right?
I am Spider-Man. Yeah.
And so that concept is I think at the core, and the reason that people don't like it as much is because it's not romantic. Because it sounds cool to hear me say that I did it 3 times a day for an entire month beforehand,
But it's not fun.
No.
And it takes so much time and energy. It's not enjoyable.
The Rocky cutscene in movies lasts 2 minutes. In real life, it might be 5 years.
That's true.
And so like, it's really, really cool to watch it for 2 minutes. But when you're on your 7th month of your business, like not really making money, and you quit your job and people are judging you and people are telling you, hey, you know, maybe let's be a little more realistic. You know, I think, you know, what if, hey, come where it's nice and warm and safe, right? Like get my approval, right? Like get my approval, come down here.
And you're seeing other people succeed or win online, right?
And you don't see the background, right? Like people who see me now in the last 24 months be like, oh my God, like he just came out of nowhere. It's like, except for the decade before that, where I built multiple very large companies to gain the credibility to be able to say what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think
And the confidence, yeah.
from evidence, right? Like that's everything.
I see joy a lot as just being present in the moment, because I think you can joyfully mourn. Like if someone's, you know, died, I think you can, you can find joy in a mourning experience if you're consoling someone else. I think it's just being present and being okay with experiencing life. So I mean, that's how I see joy. Now I haven't defined it, and I'll probably spend more time defining the words, but I just see it as being present. Like I experience joy when I am present. Like I'm enjoying this. I feel very present right now. As soon as you give up the goal of happiness or even meaning, then it stops being this thing that's outside of you. And so it allows you to be present in the moment and do what you want to do, or do what you need to do. And so if you always have this thing that you're measuring against, one, there's always a delta between where you are and where it is. But I think oftentimes it'll optimize for the wrong path. And I think happiness for most people is pleasure seeking. So they call it happiness, but it's really hedonism. And most, I don't like to appeal to religion, but in terms of old ideologies, most people have found, and I'm sure there is some science that I don't know, that people who pursue hedonistic lifestyles tend to be the most empty and the least fulfilled. And so I think people have just swapped the word happy or hedonism for happiness, and they think they wouldn't want to say that. But if you look at the actual activities they're pursuing, they're almost purely pleasure seeking.
What makes an activity only pleasure seeking versus something that will build long-term good?
Well, I think it's just time scale. It's short-term, long-term. Like something that most pleasure-based activities are, they're pleasure now at the sacrifice of goal or something later. To be fair, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, know what we're optimizing for.
Is that why that line that I think we talked about once of desire is a contract?
Yeah, so there was this big philosophy website, and then Naval quoted that site. And it was, desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. And I mean, I fundamentally agree. Whenever you want something, it means you don't have it. And you basically create deprivation within yourself to motivate behavior. So if you see motivation as the equal opposite of deprivation, like you're horniest when you haven't fucked for a while. You are hungriest when you haven't eaten for a while. You have a huge motivation to sleep when you're exhausted, right? And so if we want something, we create deprivation within ourselves to motivate ourselves to get it. But by creating deprivation, we basically create, now he calls it unhappiness, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that as I think we create deprivation.
Because would you still say there is a gap between what you have and what you
want? Sure, yeah. Like you want something that you don't have. But I mean, I think the way to skirt that is wanting a challenge. And so if you just genuinely want to fight bigger and bigger bosses, then the fact that you get the gold at the end becomes, like, if anything, the gold at the end is like irrelevant. You just want to find the next boss. And most of the champions that are out there that I've seen, you have the Michael Jordans, a lot of Olympians have huge depression after they get a gold, because now what? And so it really, and I think you can see how people react to victory tells you what motivated them, or rather what they were deprived of. So if the goal was to be exceptional, then that person hits the gold, sees it as a foregone conclusion, and is just excited to move on to the next thing. If they made their entire life about getting the gold, then they have no idea what to do. Because they were married to the outcome, not the process. And again, I think that you can win either way. I absolutely think you can win either way. But it definitely changes how long you can play.
Yeah, it's like for the right thing, that gap actually becomes an enjoyable process.
Well, it's not even the gap. It's just that if you want the challenge, then you basically create goals to create challenges. You don't create goals to achieve goals. You set new goalposts just so that you can have the trial. And so like, someone's like, what happens when you hit $1 billion? I was like, I'll make it 10. And when I hit 10, I'll hit 100. It doesn't matter, because I'll die and I'll give it all away anyways. It's irrelevant. But it's just like, I wanna be better. And the only way to be better is to do the work that I know I should do. And so that way, every day, I'm doing the work, and at least for me, that has worked. Do whatever you want. That has worked for me.